And welcome back to the Upside Sports Network. My name is Michael. Appreciate you guys joining us. It's been a while since we've done a live with you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the end of the Major League Baseball season. I know I did. I know a lot of you guys know I'm a Texas Rangers fan, winning the first World Series title in franchise history. 52 years, I believe, since they had moved to Texas. They win their first title. And then, of course, 63 years, I think, since the franchise's inception in Washington. But great all-around season. I got to go to about 5 games this year live, so if you guys do get the opportunity to go see some live baseball, the game is so much better to watch than it used to be, say, even a year ago. But 2, 3, 4 years ago, the game doesn't even look the same right now. The pace of the game just keeps you more involved, and what they say about the game right now is true on the national media as far as the feel of the game, the broadcast, etc. It no longer distracts from the actual product in the stadium. So that was some very helpful advances Major League Baseball made this year. We'll touch a little bit on some of the changes that are going to probably take place over the next year with Major League Baseball, in addition to the changes they made this year. But first, we're going to be talking quite a bit about the hot stove. What is that? That's going to be rumors. That's going to be trade rumors, free agency rumors, predictions, where we think they're going to go, and ultimately news as far as where they're traded, who they're traded to, what they're traded for, who signs where, for how much, what roster decisions need to be made. There was a deadline today, in case you guys missed it. Rule 5 eligibility had to be solidified today, so if you wanted to keep your players on your roster, that players that were Rule 5 eligible, you had to move them onto your 40-man roster spots today. We thought there'd be a little bit more activity, but there wasn't too much trade activity out there. So we decided to go ahead and do the live for you guys later on this evening. We're going to be doing this live for you guys every single evening, especially during the week anyway. We'll probably do the occasional one on the weekend, but we're probably going to bring you guys some live basketball, some live hockey, or some football on the weekends. But every single weekday, and probably a little bit on the weekends as well, we're going to be bringing you updates from around Major League Baseball, what your favorite team is doing, and where the new latest headlines are coming from. But news today, of course, Brendan Hyde, Skip Schumacher, win manager of the year in the AL and NL. I thought there was a very compelling case for Bruce Bochy to be made, but his case really comes on the fact that he won in the postseason. Brendan Hyde, they did have a great regular season. They don't have near the payroll of the other teams that were in contention at the very end, and they did a fantastic job. The Marlins had a great year out there. Nobody thought they were going to have this good of a season. Now, sure, they're going to have a little bit better offensive production with Luis Arraez arriving there. They made some shrewd adjustments there at the trade deadline, bringing in Jake Berger. And that's all with Sandy Alcantara, their former Cy Young winner, not having a good season. So all around, Skip Schumacher, great job for him being able to elevate that Marlins team. I thought Snitker probably should have gotten the nod there on the NL side, though, if I was to have a vote. I thought he was absolutely fantastic from start to finish of the regular season. Still remains to be seen what they're going to do in the postseason over the next coming years. They do have a very good roster. They have some holes in that starting rotation, but we'll get into some of those holes that they have and what they're thinking about doing to address those holes. But appreciate you guys joining us once again. Make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe. As I said, we're going to be live for you guys every single weekday and probably bring you an extra broadcast on the weekends as well, bringing you some live baseball, or excuse me, some live hockey, basketball, or football games on the weekend as well. But that's kind of the news today as far as the Rule 5 eligibility. The owner of the San Diego Padres unfortunately passed away today. The community of San Diego obviously reeling. We saw some video of Yu Darvish actually paying tribute to the memorial outside of Petco Park for him. Just an outpouring of support from the baseball community. Died at the age of 63. Had some health issues, two-time cancer survivor. And he certainly rejuvenated baseball in that community. The Padres have never been as forefront in the mind of San Diego residents than they are right now, and that includes the years they've gone to the World Series. You think back to Bruce Bochy's team back in 1998 when they faced the New York Yankees. They are no longer the second cousin in that city. The Chargers went ahead and left to the Los Angeles market, and so San Diego really only has one professional team. That's the San Diego Padres, and their ownership really decided to push the pedal forward over the last couple of years, allowing A.J. Preller to go out there and invest all of those free agent dollars that we said, hey, a small market team is really pouring money into this. Can it really work long term, etc.? and it remains to be seen. They're said to be wanting to trim back payroll to about $200 million this year, which means they have to trim about $40 more million off of that salary payroll right now, and they have got some work to do, but great on ownership there for really investing in that team and trying to get a championship there. We'll see if they are able to do so in the coming years, but thoughts and prayers out to the San Diego community. Now, for the fun part of the show, let's get into all the different teams what teams are needing, what players are out there in free agency, what can your team look to add in free agency, what trade possibilities are out there. The position player market is absolutely devoid of talent, in my opinion, this year. Sure, you got some utility players that could provide you some nice production, but the upper echelons of that free agent market, I don't want any part of Matt Chapman. I don't want any part of a contract for Cody Bellinger. You don't know what you're going to get, and he certainly had a great year for the Cubs this year, but are you ready to invest $160 million in that guy right now? Especially when he was significantly below league average for a period of 3 years before this. That really remains to be seen what's going to happen with Cody Bellinger. But, of course, the top of the market, you have to start with Shohei Ohtani. What's not to love about the guy? Sure, he's injured right now, but when he's healthy, even when he's not healthy, next year he's going to be a DH only. This might be his one chance to really win the Triple Crown on either the American League or NL side, depending on which team he ultimately signs for, because he'll be able to focus 100% of his energies on the hitting, the art of hitting anyway. He'll also be a 40-plus bag stealer as well next year. Now, he won't pitch for you next year, but that's part of the lure of Shohei Ohtani. The biggest international free agent as well is on the market this year. Since Shohei Ohtani, Yamamoto is going to hit the market. 25-year-old pitcher. He's probably the best pitcher on the market right now because Shohei Ohtani is going to be a hitter next year. That's why Yamamoto's at the top of the line there. Then you have guys like Blake Snell and Jordan Montgomery kind of following up after that. The trade market begins with Juan Soto. We mentioned the Padres are looking to trim payroll. That would trim around $30 million of that payroll number. They'd only need to trade probably another $7 to $10 million of that to get down to where they want to go. I doubt that we'll see a reunion with Josh Hader. Sounds like there's some significant interest from teams that found their way into that ALCS and NLCS, speaking specifically of the Philadelphia Phillies and the Texas Rangers. And why not? Both teams need significant help back there. If there's any indication of how their rosters were, how their bullpens performed last year and where their bullpens are at, both could use significant upgrades back there in that back end of the bullpen. The Padres, though, with Juan Soto, who ultimately could be a team in the mix for him. We've seen a lot of links out there between Juan Soto's camp and the New York Yankees. Seattle Mariners make some sense. There's a few teams out there that could go out there and bring in a guy on a one-year type of a deal and see if they can get him to sign long-term. Yankees might want to wait until free agency next year to bring him in, but the Yankees are kind of in a rock and a hard place right now. They've struggled the last couple of years. I thought that Cashman bringing in or being able to save the Yankees' future anyway by bringing back Aaron Judge was the best thing for him, because I didn't think that team was going anywhere last year. You can check out all the videos we discussed before the beginning of the season last year on where the Yankees were. They continue to show up short in that starting rotation, so bringing in another slugging outfielder, I'm not sure solves their problems even if they get the trade done. Now, of course, there's been some links between Yamamoto and the New York Yankees as well. Let's pour some cold water on that real quick. Brian Cashman got into it a little bit with reporters recently. Part of the comments that he said over recent days with some of his own players, and Giancarlo Stanton specifically, who shares an agent with Yamamoto. What did he have to say? Well, at this point, what can you expect? He just gets injured at this point in his career. You can't really blame me. That's essentially what he was trying to say. Trying to get pressure off of him and saying, hey, this is the guy we got. We're stuck with him. There's nothing we can really do about it. The injuries are an issue. You can't really predict an injury. So when it happens, you just say, aw, shucks, I guess that's the breaks. Well, the agent for Giancarlo Stanton heard that. Joel Wolf, I believe is his name. Wolf, I think, is the last name. I'm not sure about the first. But either way, he shares the agent with Yamamoto, the top international free agent. And I got to wonder, is that the right way to treat your own players first and foremost, let alone a player whose agent is the same one of the top free agent starting pitcher out there? So I'm very curious to see how the Yankees respond or how they decide to combat this type of response from the agent for Yamamoto. So we'll see what happens going forward. Welcome back, Sarah. Yeah, I'm excited to be back as well. Had a lot of fun with you guys last year this past season covering baseball with you guys. And we're going to be back with you guys every single weekday and some on the weekends as well, just like we were last off season. So make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. But a lot of rumors already kicking around out there. Some of the other trade market possibilities stem from the Tampa Bay Rays. They need to trim a little bit of payroll. Glasnow had a $5 million salary this year. This past season, anyway, he has his salary jump up to $25 million. And sure, the Rays could try to hold on to that contract, but I don't believe anybody believes that they're going to hold on to him. It sounds like he's going to be a guy that's out there on the trade market and very likely will be moved. As far as where, there's a ton of teams out there that need some starting pitching. He's on a one-year deal. Teams that need a short-term starter could look to Tyler Glasnow and say, hey, this is the guy we want to bring in. And then hopefully you're able to get him a qualifying offer after the season. Remember, if you trade for him during the season, like the Texas Rangers did for Jordan Montgomery, you cannot get the qualifying offer to recoup some value if you lose him in free agency. That's why Jordan Montgomery didn't get the qualifying offer. Meanwhile, Blake Snell, who wasn't traded, is able to get the qualifying offer, at least extended to him, and now the Padres, who are trying to trim payroll anyway, can recoup some value via the draft because he's going to sign elsewhere. Same thing with Josh Hader. He wasn't traded. Now they're going to get some compensation back as well in the draft should he sign elsewhere, which is largely expected to go to one of those other big market teams. Glasnow would be in a very similar spot if a team does acquire him and say, hey, we just want to use you for 1 year. You think of a team like the Texas Rangers who are looking for a short-term starter. They're said to be interested in bringing back Jordan Montgomery. I'm curious to see if the price point just gets too high because of all the big contracts that they have. They're said to be among the favorites for Shohei Ohtani as well. But we'll get into that Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes here in just a moment. But there's a lot of news coming out right now, but the Rangers needing some answers in the short-term starting pitching market. Ohtani wouldn't solve that even if they signed him. So that's why there's some links between Glasnow and the Texas Rangers. The Cardinals are said to be looking for some starting pitching. They've been connected to Glasnow as well. They've been said to be looking at a number of different starters. A lot of people are talking about Logan Gilbert. I just don't think the Mariners are going to move him. I think he's elevated his status way too high right now. I think the Mariners are going to view him as possibly their 1 or 1A, 1B type of ace there going forward. He was that good, that dominant this year. And I just think the market has really moved past the possibility of a Logan Gilbert trade. Actual moves that happened today, the only one of real significant consequence was Cal Quantrill. A little bit of a surprise that he got DFA'd. When you look at his numbers this year, they weren't exactly great. His previous 2 seasons, though, were impeccable. I'm a little bit surprised that the Guardians, in need of some starting pitching talent, even though he had a down year last year, that they're just going to go ahead and give up on him. Stephen Vogt, the new manager there, I'm sure is going to be able to have his say as far as what he wants to do with that pitching staff. There's some Shane Bieber conversations about the trade market there as well. Tristan McKenzie coming back from injury. That rotation is in flux. Tyler Bybee, I believe is his name, has kind of really solidified himself at the head of that rotation as well. I'm very curious to see why they ultimately let go of Cal Quantrill. He's going to be a good depth option for wherever he ultimately ends up signing this offseason. So keep your eyes peeled for where he ultimately ends up going. That's really the only big significant quote-unquote move of the day. But let's kind of dig into all of these different teams and what we could expect this offseason. We'll just kind of go in alphabetical order. This is from The Athletic anyway, kind of giving us just a roadmap of what teams might ultimately be looking for. We just saw the Arizona Diamondbacks in the World Series against the Texas Rangers, really overperforming expectations. They have a really good 1-2-3 in their starting rotation right now. Gallen, Kelly, and Fat were all fantastic in the postseason. They do need some back-end starting pitchers, though. That was really the lack of depth they really showed in the back end of that starting pitching rotation anyway during the postseason, where they went to the bullpen games instead of going to some of their other starters. So I'm expecting them to possibly go after a guy like Cal Quantrill, something along those lines, a low-cost, low-budget option. They're not going to spend too much on a back-end starter, especially when you consider the strides that Fat seemed to take in the postseason. Third base, they've been connected to Matt Chapman. Of course, they had Evan Longoria. I'm curious to see if Chapman's market is too high for the Diamondbacks, if it stays underneath $100 million, which I think there is a possibility. He hit about 350 for the first month and an extra week anyway of the season. After that, he was a 206 hitter. Not exactly knocking the cover off the ball. The one thing he does bring, high quality defense at that spot. Is he the best at the position? No, but he's still one of the best defenders in the league. Probably in the top 5, maybe top 7 at this point. But are you really willing to pay north of $100 million over a period of, say, 5, 6 years for a guy that doesn't really bring the bat anymore? Now, if he kind of finds a way to hit around 250, 260 with that defense, that's a serviceable player that you can count on. But I'm not sure that that's exactly what the Diamondbacks really need. They have some good, young third base options that they could play there instead of a guy like Chapman. But they could go out there and bring in a guy like Chapman as well, or bring back Longoria, who they had this past season. They're said to be interested in some corner outfielders. They have a lot of outfield possibilities. However, Lourdes Gurriel is a free agent. Tommy Pham is a free agent. Both were good performers in the postseason. I would not be surprised if one or both of them ultimately re-signed with the Diamondbacks. They could use a designated hitter. That's kind of what Tommy Pham kind of filled in at certain points in the postseason. I'm not sure that they're going to go out in the deep end of the market for a designated hitter, like the Shohei Ohtani, for instance. Maybe a guy like J.D. Martinez, if they're able to pry him away from the Dodgers. Say the Dodgers spend $60 million on Shohei Ohtani, that DH spot is taken, and now J.D. Martinez is left holding the bag again. Maybe then that would open up him going to the Arizona Diamondbacks. But you look at where this this team really is at. You look at their performers right here. Their departures, Gurriel, Pham, and Longoria, obviously. Marte really elevated in the postseason. We saw his on-base streak and hitting streak were fantastic. Corbin Carroll, reigning Rookie of the Year now. He just got awarded that on Monday. He was fantastic. I'm curious to see how much playing time next season Jordan Lawler gets, another good young player. Gabriel Moreno really solidified them as far as behind the plate. But you look at their payroll right now as it sits. They were at 116 last year. I don't think they're going to go too much higher than that. I could see them elevating to 125, but I don't see them going beyond much higher than that. They had a great season, great run, but I'm not expecting them to blow things out of the water financially. Next team on the list is going to be the Atlanta Braves. Top team in the entire league, in my opinion, as far as the talent level of that team last year. They're looking for a top-end starting pitcher right now. They're said to be in the market for guys like Corbin Burns, Aaron Nola, Sonny Gray. They're dipping their toe in that market. I don't necessarily think they'll go about it the trade route unless it's for a guy like Glasnow, short-term option. They have Max Fried that's going to be a free agent after the season, so I wonder if they're going to try to lock him up before they get to spring training. If they're able to do so, that would be the best case scenario for them. That would lock up their front end of their rotation. They could use another setup guy. They tried to acquire that at the deadline, bringing in Brad Hand, but I just think they need another good closer / eighth inning guy to kind of round out this bullpen anyway. You look at guys like Paul Sewald, who were traded at the deadline last year. Somebody like that kind of fits that 8th, 9th inning mold. Really would help lengthen out that bullpen a little bit. The inconsistencies with health in that starting rotation were the biggest issue for the Atlanta Braves, especially when they got to the postseason. And just the Phillies were just on an incredible roll, momentum, etc. We'll leave aside the playoff, seeding and format for another time right now. But just looking at the Braves and where they're at right now, I really like their position player group, but they do need some pitching. I'd look primarily at the starting rotation, front end of that starting rotation. They should be able to get some bullpen guys out of the free agent class for not much of a cost anyway. Next team is the Baltimore Orioles. I think the biggest issue on this team and has continued to be their starting rotation. I know they got some big strides out of young guys last year, but we saw them absolutely implode against that Texas Rangers lineup at home. And so that's why I think they need to step out there and go after a guy like Aaron Nola, like a Dylan Cease. The White Sox are said to be open for business when it comes to Dylan Cease, and I think they're going to pick up right where they were at the trade deadline and try to get that type of deal done. You pencil in Dylan Cease at the head of that rotation. Even with his struggles last year, I think the rotation for the Orioles is in a significantly better place. So we'll see if they bring in one, maybe even two starting pitchers, but they need pitching, and more pitching. They have some good prospects coming through the ranks. I don't think they need to go out there and spend on a position player, especially in this weak class. Maybe they get a depth option, a bench player type of player off of the free agent market. But if they're trying to invest big free agent dollars in this free agent class, bringing in a guy like Cody Bellinger, for instance, that's not the right move. They need to be focusing on pitching right now. Maybe even the trade market, like I said, for Dylan Cease, Corbin Burns, Glass now. There's a number of starters out there on the market with a number of teams looking for some starting pitching. You look at the Boston Red Sox. They've continued to finish in the bottom of that division, but that's still a very tough American League East. They just need pitching on the front and back end of that starting rotation, in my opinion. What they really lacked last year was just leadership from that pitching rotation. They could use a second baseman. There's some whispers about Gleyber Torres and the Yankees being a good match there as far as a trade with Alex Verdugo going the other way. Verdugo seems to be the odd man out in that outfield alignment. Justin Turner's a free agent. He's got some. He was very good for them last year. You look at their free agents right now. Adam Duvall, he was fantastic for them as well. I just don't think he's going to come back to Boston. I think there's a possibility he ultimately goes back to Atlanta. There were some whispers around Adam Duvall going back to Atlanta at the deadline for the third straight year, and I think he's going to ultimately sign there this offseason, kind of be their bench bat, that type of a player. The big thing that the Red Sox really got done last year was bringing back Rafi Devers. Getting that contract done kept him away from the division rival Yankees. I think they would have been all over him like white on rice if they were able to bid on a guy like Rafi Devers. Good on the Red Sox for getting that move done. One of the few moves that they've actually performed well at. I still question about their cycle of winning right now, where they are in their window, their title, their championship window, whatever you want to call it. I just don't think they're in it right now. I still don't think Devers is part of the solution long term, but you really have nothing else on this roster from a position player standpoint other than him and Tanaka, or Yoshida anyway, that you got in the offseason. Duran had a nice performance year for them, really elevated his career. Casas looked like a DFA-type player before the season. Now he looks like a key building block for them. So they got some good strides out of a couple of position players, but they need pitching. They just need to get pitching in any way they can get it right now. Do I think there'll be a player for Nola? I don't think so, but they're supposedly already in talks with Jordan Montgomery about where he might ultimately go. There's reports anyway before the offseason anyway that Jordan Montgomery is looking for, or was going to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 years, 80, 5 years, 100. The first couple rounds of the postseason, everybody's like, maybe he gets to 5 years, 120. Now the expectation for Jordan Montgomery is 5 years at 150. That's a steep jump, steep climb, especially when you consider the performance, the short-term performance anyway of Jordan Montgomery. Just the further he gets away from that Yankees organization that didn't utilize him in the best way possible. He spoke to that when the trade was made from him going from the Yankees to the Cardinals, and then from the Cardinals to the Rangers. He just continues to get better and better and better. And he just is a guy who knows how to pitch. He's not a 100-mile-an-hour fastball guy, but he's a guy that keeps the ball down in the zone and knows how to throw strikes and gets weak contact. That's really the name of the game for him. Those are the traits that really show longevity for a pitcher, especially a pitcher over 30 years old. And that's going to be the type of guy that might last, 4 or 5 years of this level of production from a starting pitcher. And maybe that final year, that fifth year, he doesn't necessarily, equate to the level of contract that he has. But you pay for the level of production that you're going to get during that contract, and he would certainly live up to that in my expectation. Is he worth 5 years, 150? Remains to be seen who ultimately gives him that type of a deal. Personally, I think he ultimately signs for more around the range of 5 years, 120, 5 years, 135. If it gets to 5 years, 150, somebody really bowled him over. And I think the Red Sox are that desperate for starting pitching that they might be the team that does that. Next up is the Chicago Cubs. To say they've had an active offseason already would be an understatement. They entered the offseason with Cody Bellinger front of mind as to where he might ultimately go. There's heavy rumors over the last couple of days about Shohei Ohtani possibly going to the Cubs. Then, of course, we got the surprise hire of Craig Counsell and the boot to David Ross. David Ross was a key performer for them on their World Championship team that actually finally busted through and got the job done. Went in there as manager, and he was absolutely great for them the first couple of years. And then, anyway, this past season, I thought it was still a good year, but they ultimately failed. They didn't perform well against the Arizona Diamondbacks down the stretch. Part of the reason why they didn't make the postseason, and I guess ownership and the front office really had that in their craw a little bit, and they saw an opportunity to improve. Craig Counsell resets the market for managers at $8 million per season over 5 years. I think he'll be fantastic for them. This reminds me a lot of the Joe Madden hire for them when they gave the boot to Rick Renteria. I don't think Counsell is on that class anyway of a manager, but it remains to be seen once he gets a team that actually spends money. Brewers spent money on Christian Yelich, and they really didn't have any money after that to go after anybody else. Ryan Braun, etc., was already on their roster, eating up salary, and that's why we're seeing the Brewers kind of enter that retooling, rebuilding stage of their cycle, and Counsell decides to jump ship just at the right time. Pat Murphy taking over as manager there. For the Cubs on the field, they don't have Marcus Stroman anymore. He is going to be a free agent. They picked up the option on Kyle Hendricks. He was good for them last year. He's been a good stalwart in their rotation for years now. They get him for one more year. But they're said to be looking for a front-end starter. If they bring in a guy like Shohei Ohtani, he would be that front-end starter next, or not this 2024 season, but for 2025. I still think they're going to be looking for other positions as well. You look at Cody Bellinger. If they're able to bring him back, say 8 years for 160, I wouldn't do that type of a deal, but that's going to be ultimately what it takes to get it done. Whether he goes there, whether he goes to San Francisco, who desperately needs to do things right this free agency period, as opposed to failing for the third straight offseason in a row, or the New York Yankees. I think the Cubs are still the front runner, in my estimation, for Cody Bellinger. Outside of that, they could use some bullpen help. We saw that was the biggest bugaboo down the stretch for the Cubs as to why they didn't go anywhere and why they struggled so mightily. Looking at the Chicago White Sox, we touched a little bit on what they're doing right now. They're kind of caught in the middle. They were supposed to be a really good team for the past couple of years and really underperformed. Pitching staff really didn't play well. They had hit and miss performances at the plate, injuries, whatever the case may be. Poor performance last year from Dylan Cease. League-leading home runs given up by Lance Lynn before they traded him to the Dodgers. The White Sox just have not played a good brand of baseball for a while now, and I think they need to decide whether or not they're going to completely tear this thing down, in which case they should trade Luis Robert, or if they're just going to try to trade contracts that might be ending here soon, just like a 1 year or 2 year deals, the 1 year and 2 year contracts they have left on their roster. Dylan Cease is probably their one big pitcher that they have left to move. They could trade some more of their bullpen options. They had some good options in that bullpen that just didn't perform up to their expectation. But Eloy Jimenez, another guy who could be traded here this offseason with a dearth of talent as far as position players. Not to say Eloy Jimenez was great last year, but he could be better than what's out there on the free agent market right now. It's all in the eye of the beholder, and for the White Sox, I think they'd be good on them to go ahead and try to sell as much as they can this offseason, get some low-cost options in there this offseason, and just see what they have. And then around the trade deadline, if they're still hovering around 500 or below, that's when you do a full teardown and just trade away the pieces that you signed this offseason, and then Luis Robert is the big trade acquisition at the trade deadline that they could really get a nice haul for. Looking at the Cincinnati Reds, they had some really good progress from a lot of their position player group. They had like 6 rookies really make nice strides at the big league level. They could use some pitching help, though. We mentioned that at the time when they traded Luis Castillo for their infield group, Noelvi Marte, among others, that this group was really, kind of had an overload of position players in that middle infield spot. Jonathan India, the biggest trade name out there, being dangled in pretty much every single trade talk for a starting pitcher. I think there is a possibility India does get traded here before the winter meetings, but he will be gone by Christmas. So sorry, Reds fans, if you're a Jonathan India fan, he will be on another team by Christmas. But I think they're going to be looking heavily at the starting pitching market. Do I think they're going to be playing for guys like Nola or Glasnow or pieces like that? I don't think so, but I think there's a possibility Blake Snell, Sonny Gray, players of that ilk could be on the way to the Reds if they decide to invest that type of money on those players. Cleveland Guardians are in a little bit of a retooling phase of their organization. We just saw them DFA Cal Quantrill. We talked a little bit about Shane Bieber being on the trade market. They perennially need outfielders, center fielders, left field, right field. They just need it all right now. Kwan's their one good outfielder. Straw really hasn't provided anything as far as a bat. They could use some setup guys in front of Clase. They could use better production out of Clase, who had a little bit of a down year by his standards last year as well. If he's able to perform a little bit better, the Guardians could surprise some people and be right in there with the Minnesota Twins to win this division next year. But ultimately, I don't think they have any prayer at the World Series. Maybe they back their way into the postseason, get lucky like the Diamondbacks did this year, and catch lightning in a bottle and make a deep run. But I just don't think it's going to happen. Francona retired. I don't think Vogt is anywhere near the manager of Terry Francona. Remains to be seen what level of manager he is at all. But I think Francona was one of the best managers the sport has seen in the past 20 years. Maybe top 5, top 10, depends on where you rank him. But I don't think Vogt is anywhere near that top 10 over the last 20 years. But remains to be seen what happens. We'll see what happens with the Guardians as far as their investments, what they decide to spend in free agency. But I think they're going to be looking more at reclamation projects, low-cost options. And then if they can get lucky, maybe trade one of their starting pitchers like a Shane Bieber for an outfielder. We talked about the Rangers needing a starting pitcher for the short term. Maybe a guy like Shane Bieber could be a fit with maybe Leota Tavares going the other way to fill that center field hole for them. Rangers fill a starting rotation spot. They open up an outfield spot for Evan Carter every day and for Wyatt Langford as well. Colorado Rockies, they need some starting pitching. They were decimated by injuries and poor performance last year. I don't think they're going to be spending at the top end of the market either. So maybe reclamation projects like a Martin Perez from the Rangers, pieces like that. Lance Lynn, depth options that can eat some innings and kind of mentor some of their younger starters that they're going to have coming in the next year or two. That probably is the best way forward for the Rockies. You hear about relegation in soccer, for instance, about teams just not living up to snuff and not being able to perform at the major league level or up to the level of competition and at least be competitive. We see the Rockies occasionally win a couple of games, blow up Clayton Kershaw here or there against the Dodgers, but ultimately nobody realistically believes the Rockies are going to be in contention next year, and they're not going to be for a period of time. They continually make poor decisions as a franchise. I don't know how they haven't made a change at manager either. I understand Bud Black's a great man, understands the role, really good manager for them. I get that. But they need to shake things up, and their manager just seems to be steady Eddie, which is great, but this is a team that just is going nowhere, and their talent level doesn't say that they're going to get any better anytime soon, and so you need a manager that's going to elevate the level of players that you already have. Bud Black's a good guy to get you to perform at the top end of your ability, sure, but I don't think he's the type of manager that elevates that ceiling even higher. And so that's part of the reason why I think the Rockies need to shake things up. I don't think they're going to now. It's too late in the offseason already. We would have seen him be fired after the season a couple of months ago at this point. But looking at where the Rockies are at, it's just hard to believe that they're going to be in contention anytime in the next 3-4 years. And they just continually make poor decisions as a franchise. Not going to waste too much time on them, but I was a Rockies supporter for the longest time. I enjoy the brand of baseball offensively that they play. They continually choose to go after pitchers that just haven't worked and just continue to not work. You can't really move the ball in and out, up and down, as far as those types of things. That's why Greg Maddux would always struggle in the postseason because he wasn't able to grip the ball as well because of the cold temperatures. Colorado has a lot of that going for it. With the altitude and so forth, the ball doesn't break as much. And so maybe guys that are more of a sinker ball pitcher, that's been kind of the school of thought over the last 10 years that they just haven't gone after that type of a pitcher. So we'll see if they make the decision to go after pitchers who are more sinker baller types. But as of right now, I just don't think they're anywhere close to contention. The Detroit Tigers continually are in the middle, which is where you don't want to be in Major League Baseball. They have some good pieces, high-end, high-value pieces, Riley Green, etc. And then they have some low-value options on their roster. Javi Baez contract absolutely has not been a good one for them. And that's kind of where the Tigers are at right now. Eduardo Rodriguez, of course, opted to not accept a trade this past trade deadline and ultimately decided to opt for free agency, he's probably going to get a payday in the neighborhood of 5 years, 5 years, $100 million. I don't think the Tigers are ultimately going to pay at that level. I do think they could go after some lower level guys, maybe guys coming back from injury that could perform maybe next year. Guys like Tyler Mahle, who didn't work out in Minnesota, but maybe around the trade deadline he gets back and starts throwing again, and maybe next year you have a good rotation with him at the 2 or 3 spot in your rotation. Houston Astros, they are going to go ahead and let Martin Maldonado move on, I believe. They're going to go with Diaz as their everyday catcher. They could bring him back as a backup option, but that's really about it. They're going to go young at catcher. They need some starting pitching depth in my estimation, but they're still a very good team. I don't think they're going anywhere, but their window for winning titles right now, I believe, is closing rather quickly. Altuve and Bregman are both going to be up for free agency after this season. Kyle Tucker the year after. Framber Valdez as well, along with Verlander after this season. I just wonder how much longer the Astros are going to be able to keep this thing together, especially considering they really gutted their minor league system to finish off that Verlander trade, and it just ultimately did not work out. The Texas Rangers were able to beat them at home in Game 7 to go on to the World Series and ultimately beat the Arizona Diamondbacks for their first World Series championship. Can't say that enough. But the Astros, I believe as far as free agency goes, they're going to be looking at back-end starters, low-cost options to kind of give them some innings. Maybe guys like Jake Odorizzi, who could be coming back from an injury. They've had him before. Maybe they go that route again. Maybe they go after guys that are familiar playing in Texas, like a Martin Perez. Low-cost options that are going to help them eat some innings. But outside of that, I really don't see them doing too much. They're not going to be players for guys like Shohei Ohtani, Blake Snell, Aaron Nola, Josh Hader, anything like that. Looking at their departures right now, they could use some bullpen guys. Neris, Maton were a couple of good performers for them in that bullpen. I'm expecting one or both of them to ultimately resign. Brantley, I think, ultimately moves on. I just think they're going to go younger at that position. But they still are going to be good for at least one more year. Should be one of the favorites in the American League to win the World Series as well. But they're certainly having their title window closed. We'll see if they're able to keep things going. The Kansas City Royals made a very good trade during the season. Aroldis Chapman going to Texas, and Cole Ragans was the big piece that they got back. He really elevated his career, his profile once he got to the Kansas City Royals. Rangers really needed some starting pitching around the deadline. They would love to have had Cole Ragans and the production that they got from him, but outside of that and Bobby Witt Jr., there's not too much to really be happy if you're a Royals fan. I mean, you look at that rotation. Ragans right now is probably your one long-term guy right now that you think you might be able to count on. But outside of that, there's a kind of a ho-hum group of number 3, 4 type guys. You look at that bullpen, they really have a dearth of talent after trading away Barlow and Chapman. You look at the rest of their position player group, nobody really gives you, that juice that you're looking for. Pasquantino was injured at the middle of last year through the end of the year, and he looked to be one of their other good pieces that they had to count on. But other than that, I mean, there's not much to look at the Royals and say, hey, that's a team that knows what their future is going to be in 2 or 3 years. There was a conversation about Bobby Witt possibly being traded this offseason. I think there's no prayer of that, but I get the argument that the writer was making in that article, saying that the Royals really don't have any reason to hold on to him. He's not going to be around for their next title team, and that's going to be 4 or 5 years away before they even become competitive again, based on their lack of production at the major league level and their dearth of talent in the minors. Just none of their talent has really panned out over the last couple of years, and they really need to turn the page as an organization. That's why they were making the argument of possibly floating the idea of moving Bobby Witt. Another team that's starting to see some articles come out about their team trading their best player is the LA Angels. They went ahead and went all in, performed organizational malpractice in my estimation. Perry Manassian came over from the Texas Rangers years ago. Safe to say that he did what Artie Moreno wanted him to do, and I guess that's what your job is as a GM, but ultimately you look at where the Angels were at. They don't really have much talent in the minor leagues. They're struggling to perform at the major league level. They continue to have lack of production with that starting staff. Shohei Ohtani was entering the final year of his deal, which they should have traded 2 years ago. But ultimately, they're going to lose Shohei Ohtani for the qualifying offers, basically the recoup of whatever he ultimately signs for somewhere else. And so people were floating the idea on MLB Now even they're floating the idea that now is the time to trade Mike Trout. And even Mike Trout is starting to have some regression in his game and limited availability over the last 3 years. They were making the argument they'd have to eat at least $100 million just to get somebody to take him for free. Hard to believe that once one of the best players in the entire sport now is going to have $100 million of his contract eaten just to make him tradable for literally a bag of chips. If you eat $150 million of that deal, maybe you get something back in the likes of a Max Scherzer type of a return, a top 100 prospect for the $50 million extra that you're eating off of that contract. But Mike Trout's still a very good player. Limited availability, though, is the biggest question mark in his game, and a dip in production last year as well. You look at what the Angels really need, they really need pretty much everything. That starting rotation has a bunch of 3s and 4s in it. I don't think anybody in that rotation is worthy of even being a number 2 at this point. They gave away their top prospects to bring in Giolito, etc., and it just didn't work out. They tried to save money to get rid of the luxury tax before the end of the season. That didn't work either because nobody took Randall Grichuk. They just need everything. Anthony Rendon is the big contract on their books besides Trout. He hasn't been healthy. He hasn't performed well. He got into it with some fans as well. They need to get that contract looking a little bit better. But right now, they're going to be in the bottom of that division along with the A's for a significant period of time. Now, the other team in LA is, of course, the team that took a little bit of a step back last year, kind of retooled their roster a little bit, tried to reset their payroll, and that's part of the reason why we saw them lack a lot of production around the diamond. They tried to go out there and patch things up at the trade deadline, bringing in Lance Lynn, Ahmed Rosario, Kike Hernandez, all nice pieces, but none of them are aircraft carriers. None of them are going to be everyday type players in your position player group or should be in the starting rotation. And we saw how that fizzled out in the postseason against the Diamondbacks. They need some starting pitching. Shohei Ohtani's been connected to them for over 2 years now. That's the reason why they dipped so far down, so that now they can really go out there and spend this off season. And spend they will. Now, whether or not they get Shohei Ohtani or not, they will add at least one starting pitcher. Even if they bring in Shohei Ohtani, I'm expecting them to be all the way in there on the Aaron Nola discussions. The Phillies, of course, are going to be in there. Aaron Nola is going to get a hefty contract this offseason. Just a question of where he ultimately goes. Blake Snell, there's only been a few teams that have been connected with him so far. He does issue quite a few walks, is going to be the NL Cy Young winner this year, but he should be a significant upgrade for their rotation. They got a lot of young guys in that rotation right now. They just need to bring in some top-end talent, whether that be a trade with Glass now from the Tampa Bay Rays, Burns from the Brewers. They have the prospect capital to go out there and get that type of thing done, and I think they will go out there and get that thing done. Gavin Lux should be back from injury as well. Remains to be seen what he ultimately does for them. As far as position player group that they're going to have go away is going to be J.D. Martinez and Jason Hayward. Like I said, if they bring in Ohtani, then I think Martinez goes elsewhere. If they don't bring in Ohtani, Martinez is back, and they probably add 2 starting pitchers. Clayton Kershaw is expected to miss some time to begin the season after surgery this offseason. Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Will Smith continue to be the best performers on this team, but they just need to get more weapons around him both offensively and in that starting rotation. Walker Buehler should be back as well from injury as well. You look at their payroll, where they were at last year, they did dip down underneath that luxury tax, which allows them to go out there and not get that huge tax penalty for going way above if they bring in Ohtani and other high-priced free agents like Yamamoto or Imanaga or whoever they decide to bring in on that starting staff. The Miami Marlins, the team that we discussed off the top, Skip Schumacher really kind of helped shepherd them to a winning record last year. They performed very well. They could use some more offensive pieces, though. I think ever since they got rid of JT Realmuto in that Phillies trade, they've been looking for an answer back there. Maybe they're a team that goes after a guy like Mitch Garver. He could probably fit into that lineup quite well and not be too cost prohibitive. Probably look in the neighborhood of like a 3-year $50, 3-year $60 million deal. You'd think that'd be above the Marlins' pay grade, but if they're able to bring him in, partner him with a younger catcher, I think that would kind of save the knees of Garver and keep him healthy for 162. Probably be the best thing offensively for the Marlins and help kind of with this young pitching staff that is very, very good. They have a new GM there, new president of baseball ops, Kim Eng, moving out of the Marlins anyway. And so they're looking for some fresh faces to kind of come in offensively. Jorge Soler is the big free agent from a position player group that's going to go elsewhere. David Robertson was traded by the Mets at the deadline. He should be a nice eighth inning, seventh inning guy for a team out there. Maybe even a injury situation closer for a team. Looking at the Milwaukee Brewers, Brandon Woodruff's going to miss significant time next year due to injury. If he was not injured, you're probably looking at a hefty haul to bring in to be able to trade him. But the Brewers are clearly in a rebuild mode right now. I don't think they're going to be able to retool on the fly. I think this is going to be a full teardown. They have a good position player group like the Reds do, but they don't have any other talent on the pitching side, and that's what they're going to have to bring in via trade. So we'll see what happens with the Brewers, but Burns I'm expecting to be traded before the beginning of the season. I would put that at a 99% certainty that Burns gets traded before the season. I would be shocked if he's there opening day. As far as for the rest of the roster, Willy Adames is probably the other piece that could be moved before the end of the offseason. I think he could be moved at the trade deadline, though. I think he'd be a good addition for a team somewhere out there that needs a shortstop type of player, middle infield option. But I think the Brewers right now are pretty much in sell mode this offseason. Talked a little bit about the Dodgers just a moment ago. They could be a team that's in on guys like Burns and Adames because they have holes at both spots. The Minnesota Twins made a nice run in the postseason last year. They brought in Carlos Correa for that reason. However, it seems like they don't have the stomach to play at that level anymore financially, and they're trying to pare down their payroll a little bit. I doubt that we'll see Sonny Gray come back. We might see Kenta Maeda return. But we're looking at guys like Max Kepler and Jorge Polanco. They're going to be moved out. They have some good young position players coming, but they're not going to be a contender in the American League for at least the next year or two if they're not willing to spend at the level that they did this year. And they're going to lose Sonny Gray. They're going to get the compensation for him elsewhere. But they need some talent in there. Buxton, of course, has continued to struggle with injuries. And Royce Lewis looks like the real deal. But outside of that, there's not much to be too excited for if you're a Minnesota Twins fan. Speaking as a Minnesota Twins fan, it was nice to see them finally win in the postseason a little bit, get to the second round at least, and they just need some starting pitching, but I don't think they're going to go out there and do it. I just think this is going to be kind of a rebuilding year for them, or I should say a retooling year for them. I still expect them to win the division, but this is not a division that's going to be in the World Series at the end of the season. You look at the New York Mets, they ate a whole bunch of money on the Scherzer and Verlander deals to acquire prospects in those types of trades. They are going to spend big this offseason. Yamamoto is probably one of the biggest free agents that they're going to be in on along with Shohei Ohtani, but they're going to spend quite a bit this offseason. I know they spent money last offseason and ultimately it didn't work out, but Steve Cohen does not strike me as a guy that's willing to sit idly by for another losing season. They got rid of Buck Showalter rather unceremoniously, in my opinion. I thought that could have been handled a little bit better, but I did think a change needed to be made at the position. Shocked at how that ultimately went, that they didn't get the guy that they shot for. The reason why they got rid of Buck Showalter the way they did was so they could bring in Craig Counsell. They don't get their man because he wants to stay closer to home in the Midwest. I get all that, but Carlos Mendoza, I mean, I get he's the career baseball man. This used to be the way baseball managers would come up. But if you're looking at that position, I would be looking at more veteran managers to bring into that spot. You look at the last 4 NL managers of the year before Skip Schumacher are all available right now to be hired. I thought that one of them would be a great solution for them there in New York. But I guess they wanted to go with a New York guy that can handle the New York market, I guess. But I'm just not a big believer in the hire. I'm not a big believer in the way they went about it. I'm not a big believer that Pete Alonso is going to ultimately be able to re-sign there. I think they're going to take that one to free agency, and ultimately, first basemen aren't paid like Albert Pujols anymore. But I don't think they're going to, be willing to pay at the level that's going to be required to keep Pete Alonso next year. We saw that this past offseason when they lost Jacob deGrom to Texas because they weren't willing to go the long-term deal. That's why they went with Verlander on a higher AAV for a shorter-term contract. I think that's ultimately going to be the way they go about it again with Pete Alonso if they indeed try to keep him. Rhys Hoskins kind of fits that mode this year, but I think it's 1 year too early to bring in that type of a player. If this was Pete Alonso free agent right now. Pete Alonso signs elsewhere for 8 years, 160, whatever the case may be. Then you look at the Rhys Hoskins deal, maybe 3 years, 60, 2 years, 40. That would be more like what the Mets have been doing the last year or so. Sure, there's a new leadership group there with David Stearns coming in, but I think this is coming from Steve Cohen as far as the comfortability that he has with those contracts. And I just don't think he's willing to invest those long-term dollars in free agents that are not of his own. Pete Alonso is their own, of course, but I just don't think they're going to do it on a first baseman. Can't really blame them either. First base contracts long term ultimately don't work out. We just saw what happened with Joey Votto with the Reds, but the Mets I think are in a year of retooling. I think they'll be in contention next year with the money that they're going to spend this offseason and next. But I'm curious to see what that rotation is going to look like. They have Senga at the top, but outside of that, they don't really have much. And so if they bring in Yamamoto, they bring in Snell, whoever they bring in, but they need to bring in at least one top end starter and at least 2 or 3 guys to fill out that rotation and bring in some depth. We talked a little bit about the Yankees off the top, their need for starting pitching, the issues that Cashman had with Stanton, the comments that he made, his agent responding, the agent for Yamamoto. I'm curious to see what happens with the New York Yankees from a position player standpoint. They're still stuck with bloated contracts. They have big contracts, of course, for Judge, Rendon, Stanton, Cole, etc. I'm curious to see what ultimately happens with this team. They need a starting pitcher. They would love to get Rodon back to being the player they expected him to be last year. If they get that, that's great, but they're still short starting pitching as far as I'm concerned, even if they get Rodon back to the level that they expected him to be. They need third base. They're looking at Matt Chapman. I think they'll ultimately go younger at that spot because I think they're going to go out there and try to bring in Juan Soto. I think they're going to add at least one high-end starting pitcher, whether that be via trade or free agency. But this team needs to add in a big way. Otherwise, Cashman's looking at another or another short run in the regular season where they don't make the postseason, and then we're looking at Cashman looking for a job this offseason. The Oakland A's are looking like they're going to get their team moved to Vegas. They're looking for literally everything. Won't spend too much time on them, but they do have some pieces they could trade in Paul Blackburn. Not really a big market for him, but they're always looking for low-cost options, reclamation projects, depth, those types of players, and they literally could use literally everything. The Phillies, I think they're looking at a top-end starter right now, whether that be Aaron Nola or Sonny Gray, maybe even a Corbin Burns. They're going to get probably one of those 3. They need a closer, whether that be bringing back Craig Kimbrell, trading for a guy like Kenley Jansen or David Bednar, signing Josh Hader. They're looking for some bullpen help. You look at their free agents right now. Aaron Nola, of course, is the biggest name that they have. Craig Kimbrell struggled in the postseason. We saw him kind of fizzle out in the postseason. That's why they're looking for a closer. And then, of course, Rhys Hoskins was not healthy at all last year, and we'll see what ultimately he brings. But their biggest thing that they have to look forward to is that they have Zach Wheeler to head that rotation. Trey Turner's been great since he's got there, really turned things on in the second half. Bryce Harper missed some time to begin the year, but he looks like he's going to take over that first base spot. There's been some rumblings that Nick Castellanos is likely to be traded because of his struggles in one playoff series. He was great for them this year. He finally found his footing in Philadelphia, and because he went 1 for whatever he went in the NLCS, they, I guess, are basically scapegoating Nick Castellanos as the reason why they didn't make the World Series against the Arizona Diamondbacks. I get it. You want somebody to blame, but I don't think Nick Castellanos is your guy. He's always been a streaky hitter. Didn't perform at this level last year. He was great for you this year for 162. Really carried you in the previous round. And because of one poor playoff series, you're trying to jettison the guy out of town. I just don't know. I mean, the contract doesn't look good either. I get that he's paid at the top end of whatever he's worth right now. And that's part of the reason why when you trade him, you're not going to get much back anyway. I'm just curious to see what ultimately happens. Say Mike Trout, Philly guy, they want to trade for him and fill in one of those outfield spots with Mike Trout. I mean, a trade of Nick Castellanos going the other way, Mike Trout going back to Philadelphia. Is Philadelphia really willing to attach additional prospects for Mike Trout? I don't know. Are the Angels even interested in Nick Castellanos or any of the prospects that they could trade? I don't know that either. But they have some question marks at that front end of that rotation. Closer, of course, with Kimbrell. And then, of course, what's their plan going forward with Castellanos and Hoskins? Pittsburgh Pirates, they still have some questions as far as what their ultimate long-term plan is from the starting pitching rotation. Anyway, you look at their bullpen, David Bednar. He's kind of a Lexus for a team that's been riding around in a hoopty. We'll put it that way. I mean, this team, kind of rebuilding over the last couple of years, is finally looking like they've got some good position players to build off of. Had some down performances from players that had good years the previous year and down ones this year, and they need some better consistency out of the young position player group. There's some discussions about Andrew McCutchen possibly coming back for at least one more season, but overall, the questions around the Pirates circle around Mitch Keller and David Bednar. I think it'd be great for that organization to get some starting pitching prospects in for David Bednar. A team that we just talked about, the Philadelphia Phillies, is looking for a closer. I think he would be a great fit there. I think that would be a good fit as far as trade partners as well. You look at the St. Louis Cardinals possibly for David Bednar. You look at the Texas Rangers. All of those teams are fits potentially for a David Bednar, even the LA Dodgers. You look at the San Diego Padres. They were all in this past year, and ultimately it did not work out. They got to pare down that payroll. Juan Soto will be traded, according to Buster Olney of ESPN, at 100% before the start of the regular season. So as far as that rotation goes, they've got Musgrove and Darvish at the top. Doesn't sound like they're going to bring back Snell. Doesn't sound like they're going to bring back Hader for a closer. Sounds like they're even looking to offload the contract of Scott Barlow. But this is a team that's going to have to make do with what they've got, honestly. If they can go out there and trade a guy like Juan Soto, maybe bring in, I mentioned Leody Taveras because the Rangers are going to have an overload of outfield options anyway, with Wyatt Langford making the big jump next year. But that could be their long-term answer in center field because Trent Grisham just hasn't performed at the major league level as far as at the upper end of the major league level that we've expected him to. And he's below the Mendoza line, I believe, in each of the last 2 years. Tavares struggled a couple of years ago and has really kind of come on offensively. A stellar defender out there in center and really helped their defense as well. But this is going to be kind of a retooling season, if you will, for the Padres. I'm sure they're going to try to win one for the Gipper, if you will, for their owner passing away. Condolences to the Padres organization, the Padres family. But this is a team that's in flux. They're struggled with payroll commitments in September. We saw those news articles come out that they were needed to get a $50 million loan just to cover their payroll commitments. They need to trim some payroll, and we'll see if how many other players are going to go besides Soto, besides Snell, besides Hader, besides Martinez, besides Waka. And those are just the players they've already gotten rid of. So we'll see what happens there. You look at the San Francisco Giants. They actually stole the manager away from the Padres, Bob Melvin. I thought Melvin was going to be out from San Diego anyway, so good hire for the Giants in my estimation. I think he's a good manager. I think he's going to do a good job there. I just think that they gave a raw deal to Gabe Kapler, who really got the most out of the least anyway among the fired managers. So they need some starting pitching. They need some overall talent. Honestly, I think this would be a great team for Cody Bellinger. They need to bring in some talent. They need to win in free agency for the first time in the last 3 years, where they've really gone after high-priced free agents and come up with literally nothing. Their fan base, we saw in the live chats that I did last year, just how disappointed they were after the Aaron Judge thing didn't work out. The Correa thing didn't happen. Bogarts ultimately didn't come there even. They were said to be interested in all of these shortstops and ended up getting no one. Their best free agent that they signed last year was their own free agent, Jock Peterson, Mitch Haniger as well. But Sean Manaea didn't work out, among others. And the Giants just need to add to that starting rotation. They lost Carlos Rodon last year. Luckily enough for them, that bad contract is now on the Yankees' books. But we'll see what they ultimately decide to do with that starting rotation. I think they're a good team for Blake Snell. I think they'd be a good team for Nola as well. But we'll see what ultimately the Giants decide to do. The Mariners have already started trading this offseason. They're looking for a corner outfield bat. That's why I mentioned them as one of the Juan Soto suitors. If the Yankees decide, hey, we need more athleticism, we need to get more diverse in the outfield than a guy like Juan Soto, then I think the Mariners probably would be the front runner for him. I think he'd be a great 1-2 punch with Julio Rodriguez in that outfield. Kind of picks up where Teoscar Hernandez left off in the second half last year. Hernandez was terrible in the first half, great in the second half, but they had a lot of swing and miss in that lineup. He would be a great addition to that team. But they've got some good starting pitching, some young starting pitching to try to bring in some talent. They're looking for a long-term answer at second base as well. I think they could look at Jonathan India for that type of a move. Maybe trade a guy like Brian Wu, maybe a couple of their other younger pieces as well. We talked a little bit about the Cardinals needing some starting pitching. They need a lot of starting pitching. They basically gave away Jordan Montgomery for a couple of good prospects last year, along with Chris Stratton. I don't think anybody in St. Louis thought he was going to have the type of finish that he had the season that he did last year, this season anyway, with the Texas Rangers. But I think a reunion for Jordan Montgomery wouldn't be out of the question. But I think they're looking at other opportunities, like Blake Snell at the top of that rotation, like a guy like Sonny Gray. Those are some of the starting pitchers I think they're going to keep their eyes on this year. You look at the Tampa Bay Rays. We've talked a lot about Tyler Glasnow. McClanahan's out for the year due to injury. What's going to happen with Wander Franco as shortstop? This is going to be kind of a retooling year at those spots for the Rays, but overall, they're a contending team. Even without those pieces, Yandy Diaz still won the American League batting title. They still have some good opportunities all over the diamond. Randy Arozarena has been fantastic for them. They brought in Savali at the trade deadline. I still think they're going to add at least one starting pitcher. Think of what they did last year. The 3-year, $40 million deal that they signed with, trying to remember the name, Colin Ray, was it? The big free agent signing. They lost Jeffrey Springs and Drew Rasmussen now to injury as well. I'm curious to see, what direction they go with financially. Do they decide to bring back Tyler Glasnow or do they trade him? I think the Rays' way has always been to trade the big money guy as soon as he gets to that big money. That's where they're at right now. I'll be shocked if Wander Franco has his case resolved before the start of the season. They could use a short-term answer like Tim Anderson at shortstop. The LA Angels have already been connected to him as well. Looking at the Texas Rangers, they're the team that just won the World Series. They proved they were all in last year with the moves for Max Scherzer, Jordan Montgomery, Jacob deGrom, etc. They're looking for another front-end starting pitcher. Scherzer was injured at the end of last year, of course, but we saw how good he was in that August to September run before he struck some injuries. And with his age, you can't really count on him for 162. You might be able to count on him for maybe 20 starts next year. Andrew Heaney's back. He opted into his contract. John Gray's there. Dane Dunning is there. They have a starting 5 anyway, but I think they're going to go out there and add at least 2 starting pitchers. That's what they did at the trade deadline. They had 5 starters already. They had some injuries, of course, with Jacob deGrom, so they went out there and added Scherzer and Montgomery. Montgomery's now a free agent, and deGrom, of course, is not expected back until probably September. And even then, are you really going to push him that hard? Same thing with Scherzer. How hard are you going to push him in the regular season? They have Eovaldi, of course. But I think Jordan Montgomery, they'd love to have him back, but I don't think they're willing to pay 5 years, $150. There's some discussions about Yamamoto being a good fit. Tyler Glasnow has been mentioned quite a bit as far as trade, along with Corbin Burns. But I do believe they'll walk away with at least one top-end starter and maybe a reclamation project like a Martin Perez that they had last year to kind of fill out that depth spot in that long relief role in the bullpen, spot starter role. They have Bradford as well, that's a starter that they can use from time to time, but they're looking primarily at bullpen right now, along with DH. The one guy that solves both of those issues, maybe not next year, but the following, is Shohei Ohtani. They've been mentioned quite a bit over the last couple of weeks since they won the World Series as being one of the favorites for Shohei. And why is that? Because they won. Shohei's been spending his entire career in Major League Baseball as a second citizen anyway, in Major League Baseball, as a second-class citizen. I mean, you look at the player, he's absolutely off the charts fantastic. He's about to win his second MVP award. As much as I'd love Corey Seager to win it, I just don't think he's going to get it. I mean, he wasn't available for as much time, so the depth or the loss of time that Seager has and the loss of time Ohtani have, I think Ohtani's just ultimately going to win the MVP. But you look at, even with his shortened season, he's a 10-WAR guy. I don't think he's not going to pitch next year anyway, but I think even when he does get back to pitching, I'm curious to see how the Rangers would use him as a starter, as a middle relief type guy, as a closer. The DH role only next year anyway is going to be fantastic for him anyway. He's going to be off the charts offensively, and the Rangers are all in right now. You look at their payroll commitments for where they were. They're at 195 to open the season last year. They're going to be around 215 right now without signing a single person. this offseason. If they bring back Mitch Garvey, you're probably adding another 15. If you add Montgomery, that's another 20 to 25, maybe 30. So you're already looking at $35 million in commitments right there. If you bring in Shohei Ohtani, that's roughly going to be $45 to $60 million, depending on which guy or which projection you ultimately believe. But I think the Rangers, just with the money that they got for playing in the postseason, for winning the World Series, they have a little extra money to play with. And I think they were going to spend it anyway before they had this great run in the postseason. So I think the extra money that they gained probably bolstered their spirits as far as being able to play at the deep end of the pool once again. I think they're going to try to acquire at least a short-term answer at starting pitcher either way, even if they bring in Ohtani. So looking at Tyler Glasnow, Shane Bieber, etc., those are pieces that you could see them bring in. But that bullpen is absolutely where they need to fix. Josh Hader's been the one guy that's been connected to them the most. They had some interest in Jordan Hicks as well. He's a free agent out there. I think they're going to revisit the idea of trading for David Bednar as well. Barlow is said to be available from the Padres, but he has a high walk rate. Seemed to correct that a little bit with the Padres, but that's the one issue the Rangers coaching staff really does not like to see is walks. That's why I don't think they're going to be players for a guy like Blake Snell as far as a starter. So if you have a high walk rate, steer clear is what the Rangers have been doing. Aroldis Chapman had that walk rate pretty much explode on him over the last couple of months of the season. That's why I don't think he'll be back, even though he was dynamic for them for a couple of months from July and August anyway, mid-August anyway, and then the rest of that bullpen just deteriorated along with Chapman. But rebounded just in time and was able to do just enough to get the job done and win the first ever World Series for the Rangers. But as I said, Wyatt Langford's going to break through next season. You don't have to add him to the 40-man roster. That's why they didn't have to protect him from the Rule 5 draft coming up here at the winter meetings. They will ultimately add him. I think they'll try to bring back Jankowski. I think they'll try to bring back Grossman. But I do think there's a good chance that Leody Taveras is the odd man out as far as the position player group. I think they would love to upgrade first base, but I think this team is very connected to Nathaniel Lowe, and I think they'll at least give him one more year. And if he continues to struggle, then maybe next offseason they could dip their toe in the first base market. But as it stands right now, I think they're happy with Josh Lowe, and if he doesn't perform when Pete Alonso is a free agent, then they could go after a first baseman if he doesn't correct things this season or this coming season. Looking at the Toronto Blue Jays anyway, we've talked a little bit about their rotation over the last couple of years. Well, the rotation doesn't seem to be the issue that it once was, but they now have issues all over the diamond. A lot of young guys all over the place. Chapman, of course, at third base. Belt is going to be a free agent. He performed very well for them, surprisingly. Kiermaier's a free agent as well. Now, as far as what they could do, I think as far as a kind of a replacement for Brandon Belt, a lot of people are connecting the dots between Joey Votto and the Toronto Blue Jays. I think that's actually a great fit. Fills in exactly with what they need. Belt was good for them, though, and I think it'd be tough to see him go out the door. As far as what they could do at third base, I'm not really sure. I think they could go a cheaper option like Evan Longoria. I think they would love to have Matt Chapman. They've been talking with his representation, but are you really willing to pay $20 million a year for a defense-first guy who hit .206 for 5 months of the season? I mean, that's a lot of money for just defense and availability. Availability is a great skill, don't get me wrong, but I'm not paying $20 million for it. And for that level of money, I want some better offensive production than that. Maybe the Toronto Blue Jays see something offensively that they can correct and be able to get him on the right track. But they weren't able to do it for 5 months to end the season. He's been struggling for more than just this past year. For the last couple of seasons, even his final year in Oakland was not great offensively. So we'll see what direction the Toronto Blue Jays go this offseason, but I don't think they're a World Series contender, even though this is kind of the top end of the market for them as far as, the top end of what they could be. I think this team is going to go with more of a youth movement over the next year or two, and so I think we're going to see them step back just a little bit, especially with the Orioles really taking over as the best in that division. Final team is the Washington Nationals. They're looking for some reclamation projects, allowing their young guys to develop. They traded Candelario at the deadline to the Cubs. I think they're looking for another player very similar to that. Carl Edwards Jr. of the bullpen was decent for them. At, only a .4 WAR, but it tells you just where they are as far as an organization. Lane Thomas was rumored heavily at the trade deadline as far as being one of the guys that's available. There's not a lot of offense on the market, so maybe Lane Thomas does get moved. But looking at reclamation projects for starters, I mentioned Tyler Mahle. There's a lot of starters that fit that, hey, I'm injured for 2 to 3 months of the season, but I can come in around the trade deadline and pick things up for you. Maybe a guy like David Robertson to give them some stability in the back end of that bullpen would be good for them as well. First base, third base type of guy, somebody who can play both. A guy like Justin Turner would be a good veteran for them. But I think Justin Turner might go back out to the West Coast for either the Giants, the Diamondbacks, or the Dodgers. So there's some good options out there, but the Nationals, as I mentioned, are a team that's going to be looking for value wherever they can find it. They're not looking to spend big money this offseason. They need another year to allow these young guys to get better. C.J. Abrams probably 1 year away from being fantastic. Josiah Gray, same thing. He was very good this year, but I think he's 1 year away from being a number 2 type starter, maybe even elevating even to a number 1 type starter by the end of the season, depending how the year goes. But that's kind of how things break as far as what teams are looking for. We had a lot of fun last year with baseballtradevalues.com, so let's get into that real quick. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this site, they redid the entire thing. They revalued how they value the actual players in baseball, and so you guys can have a lot of fun with this one. Play around with it, see what trades could possibly happen. As you guys know, my favorite team is the Texas Rangers. We've speculated quite a bit. Well, let me refresh this page real quick. There we go. We speculated quite a bit about them adding a front-end starting pitcher. Let's go ahead and look at who they could possibly add. You look at a guy like Tyler Glasnow from the Rays. Let's start with that one. I've mentioned that one quite often. So what could they actually trade? Let's see here. There we go. He's got 1 year left on his deal. Let me flip this over to Major League only. There we go. Okay. There's Tyler Glasnow. 1 year left. He's got roughly 38 field value, which is really great. Front end starting type value. He's owed $25+ million this year. That's what you see on the screen right beside my head there. 25 right here. Okay? Surplus value, let me move my head out of the way, is at 13.1. 38 minus the 25 gets you that 13 number. So what could the Rangers do to give up that the Rays would actually be interested in doing? You look at their surplus value. With the issues with Wander Franco, I wonder if the Rays would be interested in a guy like Ezekiel Duran. I don't think the Rangers would be willing to do this. Let's see what this value... Oh, that's a premium thing. No, thank you. Let's see what this would do. Just looking at straight-up trade here. Ezekiel Duran, 5 years of control for Tyler Glasnow for 1 year of control. I think the Rangers would probably do this if they could get a little bit back in return as well, maybe a bullpen type of player. I think the Rays might be interested in doing this as well because this gives them some insurance in case Franco is indeed done in Major League Baseball. This would be a great move, I believe, for both sides, 1 for 1. Doesn't really have to get too much into the depth or go into the farm system of either side. But this is a pretty fair, pretty equal trade. So let us know in the comments section what you guys think. Rangers add a starting pitcher, basically takes the place of Jacob deGrom this year, and then deGrom takes over as the ace of this staff next year. Maybe even re-sign Glasnow, and then you have a rotation a couple of years from now of deGrom, Glasnow, and then whatever else you have left. Dunning, Gray, Eovaldi, whoever you decide to stick with after this season. But Rangers have some interesting question marks going forward as far as this rotation. John Gray's got another year left on his deal. Heaney will be a free agent after this year. Eovaldi has the option to opt out after this coming season, so they could use some long-term stability in that rotation. They have Dane Dunning, of course, for, I believe, 3 years. They, of course, have minor league prospects, Kumar Rocker, Brock Porter, Owen White that they could turn to eventually, but none of those guys are really ready to take the ball for a World Series type of World Series type of team. Tyler Glasnow, we saw how good he was, even with the walks that the Rangers were able to draw against him, against the Rays, and I'd be very curious to see, what teams could come up with that's better than Ezekiel Duran if that's the Rangers' offer. I think that's a pretty fair offer, but you guys tell me, what do you guys think of the possibility of Ezekiel Duran and a Tyler Glasnow trade? Let's go ahead and clear this one out. We'll do another trade here. We'll do one with the New York Yankees and the San Diego Padres. Can you guys guess what trade this one's going to be? I'm sure you guys have no idea. It's going to be Juan Soto. What could the Juan Soto trade market look like? Well, like I said, I think it's going to be between the Yankees, the Mariners, and probably a mystery team or two. But primarily, I think it's going to be between the Mariners and the Yankees. 22 surplus value, as you can see right behind my head anyway, right there. But he's got 1 year left to control. Is he really a long-term answer for us? Either way, I'm not sure about that. But, sorry about that. Thought I heard something over there. Welcome back, Charles. Will you be doing baseball rumors every night on the Hot Stove Daily? Yes, I will. This is our premiere episode tonight. We'll be bringing you live coverage every single weekday night and probably a little bit on the weekends as well. But looking at this type of a trade that's been rumored out there is Juan Soto going to the Yankees. What could they give up? Well, they've been said to be interested in moving off some of their bigger contracts as well, but the Padres aren't interested in taking back money. Who could they ultimately bring in? I think they'd probably want some starting pitching. I think they would probably want just talent overall, honestly. I think you're probably looking at guys like Schmidt, Pereira, Spencer Jones. All of those types of players are in play. Austin Wells, I think, could be in play as well. They have some options behind the plate already on the Major League team. So maybe they go catching. Padres do need some long-term answers as far as the catching spot is concerned anyway. Yes, congratulations to the Rangers. Exactly. Thank you, Charles. But let's start with, let's go ahead and put Pereira in here as far as the trade. And just kind of see where we're at. Juan Soto for Pereira plus a couple of other smaller level prospects might get this type of a trade done. Outfield for outfield type trade anyway. I think this would get things done for both sides. I think the Yankees would be hesitant to give up one of their higher end prospects because they don't really have that many. But to get Soto, you're going to have to give up something of a high value. And I think that the Padres made a mistake bringing him in. It ultimately didn't work out. I thought they gave up way too much at the time. But we'd never seen a player with his trade value be traded with 3 years left to control, or 2.5 years left to control at that point. They were trying to get 3 postseason runs out of it. They did get that postseason run in that half a season. They were hoping to get this past season. That's why they didn't sell at the deadline. Ultimately, it didn't work out. And now they're going to forego that final year as far as a postseason run. With the ownership group, of course, having to make some changes now after the passing of their owner. They're going to have to pare down that payroll because they had to get that $50 million loan just to pay their bills in September. Juan Soto is going to be out the door. Let's go ahead and change the team here. We're going to change him to the Mariners. Mariners and Padres. What could they give up? Well, Padres need some starting pitching with the loss of Blake Snell. So maybe you go out there and get a guy like Bryce Miller. Or a Brandon Wu. I don't think Miller would probably be the guy. I think we're going to go ahead and go with a Wu. And just see where the trade's at right there. Pretty close value right there. I think the Padres probably would want one more piece just for volume. Maybe like a 26-year-old relief pitcher who had a good year last year in Double-A or Triple-A, going back the other way, might get the deal done. But Juan Soto isn't going to bring in the trade package that they gave away to bring him in from the Nationals. There's no C.J. Abrams that they're going to get back. There's no Mackenzie Gore that they're going to get back. No Robert Wood, no Robert Hassel, no nothing like that. they're just going to have to live with whatever offers they get from a couple of teams that are going to be interested in a corner outfield bat like Juan Soto. Now, of course, what is it going to cost to be able to sign him long term after this season? There were some rumors that it might cost as much as Shohei Ohtani. I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think we're looking at the Mike Trout level money for what Juan Soto could get after this season. But kind of keep your eyes peeled for something along those lines this offseason with Juan Soto and Shohei Ohtani. Again, we'll be live for you guys again tomorrow. We'll probably do that one around 7 or 8 o'clock, so make sure you join us as well. We're going to have some more awards announced tomorrow as well, but congratulations to Managers of the Year, Brandon Hyde, Skip Schumacher, Rookies of the Year, Gunnar Henderson, and Corbin Carroll, who've been announced so far. But again, make sure you join us tomorrow night. Appreciate you guys joining us, and make sure you join us all off season long on Major League Baseball Hot Stove Daily. We'll see you guys next time, and make sure you hit that subscribe and join us here at The Upside.